Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Smart Cities, presented by Chris Van, Innovation Officer for Global ICT Development at the World Bank. This webinar kicks off our new webinar series on smart cities, jointly organized by the ICT practice and the urban practice of the World Bank. This series will facilitate dialogues on how cities can make use of data and technology to improve city planning, management, and service delivery, engage citizens, and enhance accountability, which is commonly called smart cities. This first webinar today will introduce the concept, framework, and key components of a smart city strategy. It will demonstrate through practical examples the pros and cons of two main approaches to smart cities, top-down approach and bottom-up approach. It will also explain the role of the public sector, as well as the importance of innovation and innovation ecosystems. Subsequent webinars will feature practical examples to showcase experiences of both developed and developing country cities and application of specific how-to tools. We are very pleased to have Chris Van as our speaker today. Let me briefly introduce Chris. Recently described as Fed Insider as innovating innovation itself, Mr. Chris Van is the Chief Innovation Officer for Global Technology Development at the World Bank. In this capacity, Chris leads the implementation of the World Bank's Information and Communications Technology Strategy, ICT policy, and engagement dialogue with internal and external clients, and global ICT knowledge and expertise with client countries. Prior to joining the World Bank, Chris was the Deputy U.S. Chief Technology Officer for Government Innovation in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. In that role, Chris focused on making government more open, entrepreneurial, and lean, creating new and innovative opportunities for delivering government products, services, and processes, and incubating innovation capacity in the civic, technology, and civil society arenas. Over the past two award-winning decades, Chris has had the honor of serving 4 presidents of the United States, thousands of professional association practitioners around the world, for-profit consulting organizations, and local government organizations. Without further ado, let me ask Chris to start his presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone, from Washington, D.C. I'm amazed and happy to see such a worldwide audience joining us and saying hello from, as I said, from all over the world. It's good to have all of you here to help me talk about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. For the past 25 years or so, I've had the pleasure and the opportunity of not only serving in cities, but traveling around the world, seeing what other cities are doing, and really understanding what makes them special, and what makes them unique, and what makes them innovative. And I hope today, in this first of several seminars, that I will be able to introduce you into some of the best practices around the world of what we call smart cities, and talk about the pros and cons of different approaches, and hopefully build a solid foundation of understanding and introduction to concepts for future conversations around smart cities as hosted by the World Bank. So I think that it's, let me go to the next slide here. I think the urban challenge is really at issue here in what we're talking about. And that is, cities, like many organizations, have grown up with individual silos. The delivery of services for water or for electricity electricity or for transportation or for governance have grown up individually in silos. And it's been very, very difficult for those silos to work together. The way the budgets are set, the way the organizations are defined and staffed, we continue to see in most cities around the world this siloization, if you will. And as problems such as mobility and waste management, resilience, and climate change are increasingly affecting cities, the cities are having trouble responding because of these silos. In fact, MIT and others have suggested that rather than thinking in terms of silos, we need to think about integrated approaches, approaches to having problems thought of not in individual sets, but in terms of all of the services that a city needs. This is an example of what happens when we do this kind of development by silo. This is a city, this is Mexico City actually, and when I first saw this slide at a conference, I thought that it was actually a still from a science fiction movie, and indeed it is not. It is from the city of Mexico City, and it really shows the problems that cities are facing, these mega cities. And the first is this rapid urbanization problem. And it's not necessarily in developed countries, it's in developing countries. And you can see from this slide that it is rapidly increasing and will increase over the next decades to the point that cities in developing countries will face problems that far outpace what we see today. By the time I'm done, as you can see, populations in Europe will have increased by 35, but we really see the largest growth in the African continent and the Asian continent as more and more cities and the small to medium-sized cities grow in each of those continents. We also know that the challenge that is being raised here is that citizens are increasingly demanding better and more integrated services from their governments. It used to be that citizens would put in their tax dollars almost into a vending machine and get a service back. But as they have become used to what the private sector provides, which is basically 24/7 services, think of an ATM where you can get that cash any time of the day. They're thinking that government services should be providing those the same way. And all city governments, indeed all governments, are facing this issue of limited human resources and budgets and must, at the same time as having to cut back services, try to figure out how to make services more efficient and effective and more available to their citizens. Which brings us to this idea of smart cities. There are many, many, many definitions of smart cities, and over this seminar series, we will talk about many of those definitions. But I think for today, I'd like to propose just a simple definition of smart city, and that's just being good stewards of what we have, of doing more with less. And my focus as Chief Technology Officer in the past and now Chief Innovation Officer at the World Bank is really how do we figure out how to use technology, the transformative power of technology, to enable some of these solutions to be developed, to be implemented. How do we use technology and its transformative powers to bring everybody together and really think through in a systematic way how we can address some of these major problems that are facing cities. What I'd like to do is really talk about 3 different approaches today to how technology can help city governments. The first is top-down, then we'll move to a bottom-up, and finally, I think more of a holistic, integrated approach. So there are no right approaches or wrong approaches. It just depends on the particular environment, the particular city, the particular country that these problems, these challenges exist. But we're going to start first with more of a traditional government approach, which is the top-down approach. If you look at what's going on in the world from a technology standpoint, we see this idea of the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything. And actually that's the map behind these words that you see before you. And if you believe companies like Cisco or others that there will be 50 billion connections to the internet by the year 2030 of both animate and inanimate objects, you can see the potential for an organized approach to providing products and services. If you look at the growth of mobility and know that 7 billion people on the planet have cell phone subscriptions, or the rise of internet and the social networking part of internet, or the rise of data and open data and big data and the connectivity that pulls it all together, you can see some of the basic building blocks, if you will, of how an organized approach towards technology can actually enable the type of service delivery that our citizens are demanding. I want to give you a couple examples of this top-down approach. This is a city in the United Arab Emirates. It is a city, it's a planned city. It was, as we say, a greenfield opportunity in that they could actually create from scratch a city and design it as they would like to see it run. And very few of us have this wonderful opportunity. It's basically becoming a laboratory or a petri dish for how we could actually think through how to integrate services and reduce those silos. While it's a wonderful thing and it's a beautiful thing to behold, if you will, the problem is that creating this city cost about $30 billion, and most existing cities don't have that kind of capital or that amount of time or ability to plan. But it is proving to be a fascinating and very illustrative example of how cities can actually be built and run in a different way. Another example is Rio de Janeiro. And Rio de Janeiro didn't take the kind of build a whole city from the ground up. What they decided to do was create an ability to see into the existing city, to use a city control center. And city control is probably, in English, a bit of a misnomer. Really what they want to do is really understand what's going on in the city by using sensors and other points, technology points, to actually get data that they can feed into this one center, understand better the heartbeat, if you will, of the city, and help that data, use that data, I should say, to make better governing decisions. Once again, while it's a fantastic example and it's an amazing thing to behold, and it is very, very valuable for the city of Rio, not all of us have about $14 billion in order to put this together. And so it's a wonderful example of what can be done in a smart city top-down approach. The last example I would like to share with you is from my friends in Seoul. And I had the pleasure recently, and in fact I think you all will be hearing from the CIO of Seoul in the next or the following seminar. But he was able to come to Washington, D.C. and share with us some of the amazing things that he and the South Koreans are doing in Seoul. And this is an example of heat maps where they've actually been able to track where their youth spend most of their time during the day. And as they look at this data, they're using this data to actually design much more efficient placement of the employment hubs, the places where they're trying to bring their young and in their 20s and 30s residents to come together and really develop all of those new and innovative approaches to living and working in a city. And they're using this data to really focus and hone in on where those employment hubs could and should be. And I think it's a fantastic example of this concept of big data brought to life, of actually using data by a city to make smart decisions rather than intuitive decisions. So if we think of that as examples, 3 examples of kind of the top-down, obviously there's a bottom-up approach, and that's what I'd like to talk about next. And this slide says understanding the city as an ecosystem, and that's really what I'd like to focus on in these next slides. This is a beautiful picture, I think, of the City Hall in Lisbon, but it really is this, it is meant to represent the idea that government isn't one organization, it's many organizations. There is no one person, there are many people. There is no one business, there are many businesses. There is not one university, there are many universities. And really what needs to happen is we need to think about all of the players in the life, if you will, of a city, and how we work with those players in order to understand their needs, understand their ideas, and co-create the solutions that are required. I'd like to share with you a cartoon, I think, that really captures the basics of this ecosystem approach. We start with government on top, and I don't mean to say that government should be on the top and coming down, but in its traditional sense, government has an incredible amount of information about the daily lives of you and me as we live in cities, as we visit cities, as we leave cities, an incredible amount of information. But so too does private sector and academia, and oftentimes we don't pay enough attention to civil society organizations or to our citizens because actually they live and breathe these problems every day. They have a much better and much deeper understanding of the challenges and the opportunities of living in cities, and we must keep them and make them part of the ecosystem, if you will, of players that will help us solve these problems facing cities today. There are several examples that I'd like to share with you of cities who are taking this ecosystem approach or bottoms-up approach and actually doing some amazing things to engender discussions and that co-creation that I talked about. This is the city of Helsinki, and this particular organization is creating a hub, if you will. Remember that those four players, if you kind of think of the hub in the middle, though this organization is that hub in the middle that's connecting all of those players. And what they're doing is they're providing an opportunity for private sector companies to test their solution and ideas, for governments to test their solutions, academia to test theirs. They're using it to launch challenges and open competitions, and using it as a place to share data, opening up data from inside the city and make it available to the folks who live in the particular city to create the solutions, to understand the problems better, and to create the solutions that will move the city into this idea of a smart city. This one is from New York City, and it's amazing for me as an American to have watched the transformation in New York. I'm old enough to have been around in New York in the 80s and to know what it was then to what it is today and see the growth in 30 years to where New York City is the second leading economic driver within the United States. If you think of Silicon Valley as the first, New York City is the second, and they now have over 30 incubators, 14 accelerators, and they have a startup community generating about $6.6 billion worth of economic growth for the city of New York, all because they're focusing on what we're calling amenities. And these amenities are simply spaces, whether they be co-working spaces, whether they be incubators, whether they be startup accelerators, whatever it may be. New York City has focused very much on creating these spaces. And what we know from experience in New York, but Silicon Valley as well as other parts of the world, is that creativity kind of builds on itself. And so when you have people who are passionate about what they do and they want to build their own businesses or they want to solve specific problems for a city, when you bring them together, magic happens. We're not quite sure why it happens, but it happens because people are excited, they share, and they actually propel each other to further levels of development. And it has become one of the most exciting parts of building smart cities today. I know we have friends online from Barcelona. Barcelona is, I think, becoming one of the poster cities for this idea of open innovation. The idea that we can't solve all the problems ourselves, so let's open up the solution, problem-solving process and solutions to others and see what they can do to help us create those solutions. And one of the things that is most exciting about Barcelona, I could talk about many things, but today one of the things that I'd like to highlight is that they're focusing on solutions to a problem, procuring solutions to a problem, rather than individual requests for proposals or requests for pricing, whatever it may be. They're actually saying, no, 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 we don't want to use a traditional procurement process, focusing on terms of reference and taking 1 or 2 years to do. We want to focus on solution and bring everybody together and bring a solution that transcends departments and agencies, but actually solves the problem that the city faces. It's an amazing and a wonderful experiment, and I hope, in fact, you will be hearing from folks from Barcelona who will explain in more depth, far more depth than I'm doing today, what they're trying to do and what they're accomplishing. My last example is from Mexico City, and I think once again it's this idea of creating a laboratory, as you see on the slide, a living lab, if you will, for the city to really create the opportunity for partnership in understanding the problems and creating solutions to those problems. Challenges from neighborhoods that involve citizens, workshops to co-decide on how to use public space in neighborhoods. They're developing sensors to collect data. They're opening data to bring developers in to find solutions and create the visualizations, if not the applications for smartphones, in order to bring the solutions to the most of the people that they can. So it's really creating an awareness of the city challenges, such as traffic congestion, aging population, and the kind of the changing social behavior of the citizens in Mexico City. Bringing all of that together, kind of mixing it up, and allowing that to kind of develop on its own an amazing set of responses that the government is then helping to build out. So I think there are a couple of things I just want to say about this bottoms-up approach and really the top-down approach. There's not one or the other that's better. It's simply that they're complementary. One cannot not have some amount of top-down government approach. But I think what we're saying is to require efficient planning and to really make it applicable to any income and any problem that a city faces. We also need to add the bottoms up. And I think I promised at the beginning of this seminar that there were 3. And actually, this is where I would say that it's not top-down or bottom-up. It's kind of an integrated approach, a holistic approach that actually most cities intuitively understand, but I think what we're arguing can be accomplished in new and different ways. So one of the ways that we are approaching this is this idea of connecting cities. So many cities around the world, and I've probably visited over 150 cities, are doing unique and interesting things. But what we often hear from cities is, oh, we don't know what anybody else is doing. We'd love to share what we're doing. We don't know what the impact is somewhere else. And so this idea is to create a worldwide connection, I guess, between individual cities and what they're accomplishing. And we believe that is one of the fastest and most effective ways to actually speeding up the development process in order to make it better, cheaper, faster, if you will. And one of the approaches that we are talking about is something called City Sense. And it's by no accident that the tagline says innovation from within, because it's based on basically 3 principles. The first principle is, as I've said, that we are overwhelmed. Cities are overwhelmed by the challenges that face us. There never will be enough budget, there never will be enough time, there never will be enough technology to actually solve the myriad of problems that face cities. And so what cities are finding is the best way to actually still move forward is to open up the process, to really open up the city and create it as a platform for others to help build value on top of what the city does. The second trend in this city sense innovation from within approach is that if we're building a platform and we're inviting everybody in, then those other folks coming in, organizations, small businesses, civil societies, organizations, we become co-creators of the solutions. And one of the biggest ways that many cities are doing that is by opening up and releasing their data and making it available for others to create interesting applications, interesting visualizations, new services based on that. I think the third trend, if you will, is that we in government, and I consider myself a recovering government official, oftentimes get so focused on what's required for the city to do its job that we forget that we're there to serve the citizen. So what we must do is really change the paradigm and really focus on our services from the perspective of the citizen and what makes sense for the citizen to actually understand and use the particular service. So it's really focus on the customer that has to become key. And I think encircling all of this really is the sense of empowerment. That if we can actually empower the individuals that we govern, I think we will be able to create the sustainable innovation life cycle that is required as we deal with rapid urbanization or an aging infrastructure or the myriad of social problems that are coming from this rapid move to cities around the world. So with that as a foundation, CitySense was created by the World Bank as a network of knowledge and community practice to really connect cities as innovation hubs. And it's one of the most exciting things that I've seen here in the World Bank. And it's actually created an opportunity for a lot of applications and repositories for those applications. And we gather together every year, last year in Barcelona and this year again, and bring government officials, and we really just introduce them to what's possible and to introduce them to the ideas of government as a platform or co-creation or the citizen as the driver of our innovation. And it's amazing what happens when government people see what's possible in these networks and really then become more excited and redouble their dedication to actually creating an innovative solution set for their particular city. So I hope that this has been somewhat useful at a very high level to introducing you to these smart cities concepts and the models of top-down, bottom-up, or integrated holistic approaches. And what you will see in future seminars will be the discussion of each one of those and really digging deep into understanding some amazing innovations that are taking place, the problems specifically that are being addressed, the solutions that are being developed, and the impact. As we move to a world where we are experiencing real-time data for real-time decision-making, for real-time impact, which allows for real-time measurement and evaluation. And I think we're basically at the cusp of an amazing new future that will allow technology to make governance as efficient and effective as it possibly can be. So thank you for joining me this morning here in Washington, wherever you are around the world. And I thank you for your attention, and I think we will move into some question and answers where we can dig a little bit deeper into the concepts that I've introduced. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the very interesting introductory presentation. And as you said, in subsequent webinars, we'll hear more from the first-hand experience of those practitioners. And the three approaches framework that you presented is very useful for our cities to think through their approach towards smart cities. And I think it's also very encouraging for some of the cities to think that smart cities, the concept and approach of smart city is not necessarily associated with very expensive solutions. They can always be smart with process-oriented and people-oriented approach. So now there will be 3 multiple choice questions appearing in our screen, and I would encourage our audience to vote. So the first one is, can any city implement technology and become smart? Okay, I see that majority of our audience voted for number 3. Any city, regardless of size and level of income, can implement a smart city approach to tackle its urban problems. Chris, do you have any comments on this?
Well, I certainly agree with the majority view on this. I think any city can do it. I think oftentimes we think of large cities, the London, Paris, Barcelona, San Francisco, whatever it may be, and they become kind of the epitome of success and innovation, and we end up comparing ourselves to those cities and think oftentimes that we can't possibly accomplish what they're accomplishing. But I think we can, and we in the World Bank certainly see that in the developing world, where smaller cities that really don't have much in terms of resources actually are innovating. And it's gratifying and actually amazing to see cities innovating when they have nothing to innovate with. So I do agree with the majority that any city can do it. We've actually seen it done. Sometimes we just get a little in awe of the beautiful cities or city-states like Singapore, your home, that are doing amazing things, and I think we just need to learn from them and figure out how to apply the lessons from those examples into other circumstances.
In terms of the second question, what approach for smart cities you see more applicable to your cities? Again, 86% of our participants voted for a combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches, but there are also about 5% and another 7% voted either top-down or bottom-up. I think in our open Q&A we can hear more from the audience about your thoughts on this. Shall we go to the next one? The third one, can city governments find solutions to all problems facing the cities? About 80% voted city governments have limited resources that put limits to what they can do. We also have, okay, the percentage is changing as we speak. So we also have, a good percentage of people voting city governments can multiply resources by leveraging external actors from the city. We have a small amount of people voted city governments can work without the city stakeholders, but only through traditional ways of consultations, such as surveys and planning consultations. Chris, would you like to comment on this?
I think there is, let me repeat probably what I've said, there is no one answer that applies to, one approach that applies to every city. Cities are complex beings, if you will, that are within other forms of government, national forms of government, other state or local forms of government. And so I totally agree that city governments have limited resources that can put limits on what they can do. But I think from what we've seen at the World Bank, city governments can multiply or leverage those limited resources through involving other people in the ecosystem and actually get much more out of what they've got if they do that. In fact, my old boss at the White House is famous for talking about the fact that the smartest people don't actually work for you, they work for somebody else. And of course that's true, but because we always like to think, though, that we have the smartest people working for us, but simply it's an issue of numbers. There are just so many more smart people outside of where we live in the world. How do we tap into that collective intelligence? And that's really what we're talking about today. How do we tap into that? How do we leverage that? And in certain cases and in certain countries, I agree, city governments may only be able to work through kind of traditional stakeholders. But I think that increasingly what we're seeing even in those cases, those cities are recognizing the potential of leverage and how important that is.
Thank you very much. I think people are getting ready for the open Q&A. I saw some questions already coming, so please feel free to type your questions, and I'll read them for Chris to address. Let me pick the first one from Kim Chandler McDonald. What are you hoping we do with the knowledge you are sharing with us? Innovation is active. How can we actively make our communities smarter?
There are several ways that individuals can activate or excite the community to action. One is just simply to talk with the fellow people within a particular city and create a community of practice. Community of practice, we in the bank oftentimes think of big communities of practice. It all starts with the individual, and it all starts with individuals talking to other individuals and creating a grassroots network of people who care, who are committed, and who have ideas. And I think once you can create those communities of practice and grow and build them, you have an amazing tool to actually create the kind of change that we're talking about. And again, future webinars or seminars will talk about how you actually do that. But I think the second thing is when you have the ability to work with businesses and governments and civil society organizations, it is to work with either one or several of those to actually demand and help build those innovation hubs or those spaces, if you will, for people to come together. And I think that we've seen in New York, it wasn't for example, it wasn't the government necessarily who was saying we will create these. It was people coming together and saying we need to create these because we see the need for this, and then building it and then showing it to the government, and then the government understanding what it has, what it needs, what it would take, and create the policies around it. I think what we're doing is really reflecting in that story this idea that in an analog world, policy dictates delivery. But in a digital world, policy is shaped by what we actually do. And so what I'm suggesting in answering this question is that there's a lot of power in individuals coming together, creating the environments, creating the passion, creating the spaces, and using that to actually shape what government does from policy.
There is a question and observation from Chris Lindbergh, who is probably an urban planner from the question that he is asking.
Okay.
It's exciting to see the smart city idea and the use of technology, but it seems to me to be of limited value if we don't change the approaches to land use planning. The image at the beginning of the session shows suburban sprawl in Mexico City. None of the smart city approaches presented so far would have changed that development pattern. It seems to me that we need more effort invested in the fundamentals of citizen engagement and good smart growth planning rather than investing in technological big data solutions. I guess we need both, but I worry about cities getting fascinated by the shiny object syndrome of sexy technology rather than focusing on the basics.
I couldn't agree with that last summation more. Look, my career is based on technology, and I believe in the transformative power of technology. But for me, and what we at the bank advocate, is that technology is simply a tool, a very important tool, but a tool that the government can use, that the citizen can use, that academia can use, and that the private sector can use to really shape development and hopefully speed it up with better accuracy and efficiency. So I totally agree that sometimes cities do just get enamored with these, with an app or a shiny app, or with all due respect to a data center or a city center. But I think that what I'm trying to get the point across is there is no question that a city needs good policy, and it needs to improve land use policy. There's no question about that. But I think what I am saying is that cities may not have the money to do that. They may not have the political will to do that. They may not have the ability to do that. So if we just wait for them to create and improve these policies, we may never get to where we want to be. If we are fine with that, that's great. I don't happen to be fine with that. I'm actually a little more impatient than that. So what I'm trying to figure out is what tools do we have to help shape that policy? And I think technology and the way we think in technology from a systems approach becomes very important here. And if we can build out the capacity of the community to actually advocate for and build and test and show the policymakers that change is possible, that it can happen, then I think we have a better chance of changing those land use policies than if we just wait for government on their own to change it.
A question from Raikan Ismailova. I understand that ISO for smart cities are being developed, as there is not a city in the world as full smart city. Could you please share your thoughts around ISO?
Could the requester define for me what ISO, what he or she means by ISO? International standards? International operating standards? Okay, if I'm understanding and if I'm reading and understanding that correctly, I absolutely agree that there is a need for standard or standardization in approaches to using technology in a smart city context. And increasingly, we are seeing those standards being developed primarily in Europe right now, where the city of Helsinki, I believe, is actually taking the lead, but bringing together a number of cities to actually take apart this ecosystem and figure out what the underlying standards or requirements are for the effective use of technologies in these cities. It's called City SDK, and I would recommend that all of you go to the internet and search for City SDK. It's the most exciting thing I've seen to an organized, integrated approach to this idea of standards. And again, my belief, and this may reflect my American approach more than anything, but I believe that it's by these test cases, it's by figuring out how to build small and then iteratively make them better that actually will lead this discussion around smart cities and make it much more effective rather than waiting for one or more government organizations to necessarily design, build, and implement these standards. But if organizations like City STK and others can do it, I think we can show the world what can be done and again inform policy rather than wait for policy. I see a question from Noman, if I'm pronouncing it right. Which international organization will take the lead on smart cities? I don't know that any international organization will do that. I think, again, if the world moves towards the vision that I've laid out today, it really is all of us working together in our individual ways, reflecting our own needs and problems and solutions to actually doing it. And I think that if done right, again, using this innovative solutions network thinking, that we will actually be able to build networks of knowledge centers and actually through building those networks actually share experiences and create common platforms where whatever we build will actually be available to anybody else to use. And it's akin to kind of this city commons approach that is taking off in various parts of the world. And I think over time we will see all of that coming together and really creating an opportunity to go to one place and see what Barcelona had done here and what Singapore had done here and what Buenos Aires did in this particular area, and then share those so we don't have to rebuy them, but we can actually share them. And using this concept of openness, open innovation, open data, open source, to actually create solutions that perhaps can be very easily moved from one jurisdiction to another and help move this movement forward.
There are two questions that are interrelated about urban slums. One from Avirat Inamdar. One of the major problems of metro cities in India is illegal settlements, which needs real-time modification or revision of land use allocation. How a smart city adjusts the problem of allocation of land uses, and how it can fit in the legal system of city plan process. And another one from Duncan O'Moyle. How do we ensure the urban poor, usually in slums, also participate in these smart city approaches and be part of the solution? In your experience, do the solution envision their participation? Are there any examples of cities currently doing anything to make them active participants as well?
Two excellent questions. So let's go back to the first question. And indeed, we could have whole seminars about this one. But I think part of the problem with rapid urbanization and the urban slums that the questioner brought to my attention is the fact that they are moving and building so quickly that organized existing governments don't yet have the ability to even know what they're dealing with. And I think the first step in any problem solution is to get as much data about the problem as you can in order to figure out how to build the solution. So even before we can talk about all of this ecosystem, you need the data upon which, or the best data you can get, upon which to have the discussion and build the solutions. So there's an example in Tanzania where there is a slum, or there was a slum area in Dar es Salaam. And this particular slum area had grown so quickly that the city government had no idea who lived there, how many people lived there, how they were getting their sanitation, if they were getting sanitation, where their electricity was coming from. And as a result, just didn't govern it because they didn't know how to, because they didn't have the data. So what they did, and this isn't something that every city can do, but they went to the university, back to that ecosystem. They went to academia, and they found some students who were somewhat tech savvy, and who knew how to, or were introduced to, an open platform that could actually be used by anybody in any city in the world. And they gave them some amount of technology in the form of an iPad in that case, but it could be a cell phone. And they actually empowered them to go into the slum area, and using that cellular technology with its geospatial capabilities to actually create the first ever map of this particular slum, who lived there, what services were being used. And from that first ever database and heat map and visualization, the city was able to start making decisions and governing that particular area that needed their help, obviously. And so I think the fundamentals are finding individuals with a passion who will go in, and with existing software, the city didn't have to buy expensive software. They did have to get the technology devices to actually do it, I will admit to that. But they were able to then create the solution. And those university students, by the way, after the project was done, went into the public sector and created their own business, economic growth and job creation opportunities, and are actually doing that for other cities in the world. So I think it's one example of what can happen in this holistic approach. When you just think differently, they didn't wait for government. They used technology and the people, unemployed students, to actually go in and create this opportunity. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second question. If you could just quickly sum up the second question.
It's about how to also make sure that the poor people in the slum also participate in these smart city approaches.
So I'm going to turn to an example in Barcelona where this is indeed happening. You know, many cities are guilty of always focusing on building innovation capacity where it's easiest. And where it's easiest is generally where either there's a lot of money in terms of business or in terms of personal wealth, or where there are really a lot of smart people. And it's fairly easy to innovate when you have all of those pieces to innovate with. But to the question, we shouldn't be just innovating there. We should also be innovating in the parts of the city that are untapped, and generally that is where the more disadvantaged people live. And what Barcelona did is they actually looked at all of the regions of their city and actually made a plan to build innovation centers, co-creation centers. There's an idea, which again you will hear about in future seminars, about this maker movement and about 3D printing. And what Barcelona did was specifically focus on starting the building of their hubs in the poorest parts of the city. And it's been amazing to watch this experiment in Barcelona as they have built these opportunities, these co-creation, these amenities, as I refer to in New York City, and watching the communities who have been disadvantaged for a really long time actually evolve and bloom and actually lead the rest of the city as these hubs of innovation are being developed. And by the way, Barcelona didn't spend millions of dollars on them. They actually created and opened up just a decent space in a poor, disadvantaged area and gave it the basic tools, and the community is building the capacity out of it. So again, that is an example. There aren't enough examples, and I would really hope that we can work through this seminar in understanding other examples, because I know they exist, but actually how we could work together to build many more of these examples, because the questioner is right on target. That's actually where we need to be spending most of our time, is in the poor sections of these particular cities and actually unlocking the value in those parts of the city.
Thank you, Chris. We only have 3 minutes left, so we can take one final question. It's from Donna Chiarelli. I work with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and one of the big barriers to innovation we see is that municipalities by nature are quite risk-averse, and that we need to see more innovation in governance and decision-making at the strategic level. Without that kind of innovation, technological solutions will have more limited impact or be much slower to be picked up at all. What is your perspective on the role of innovation in municipal governance?
I agree with the questioner. Based on my experience, if you don't really get buy-in from the leadership of the particular governance unit, whether that's a country, whether that's a state, whether that's a city, it is much more challenging to do what we're trying to do. That's why the idea of city sense becomes so important, because what we're trying to do is create a network of presidents of countries, of governors of states, of mayors of cities who actually understand this and actually are building within their particular jurisdiction amazing opportunities and sharing that. Because what I've found is, generally speaking, a politician will listen to another politician or want to compete with another politician or want to be better than another politician in another area, and so that kind of competitive spirit enters into the conversation. And so what we're trying to do is create a common layer of foundation of knowledge and experience and build upon that the ability to actually share that knowledge. Now that's kind of esoteric, that's theoretical, and that's going to take a while to actually happen. That's why I think that there has to be, from the bottoms up approach, a demand for this, and a demand that actually will move the leaders within a particular jurisdiction to move forward as kind of as a second way to address this problem. And I think if we can, working together, actually get enough people excited and use the mayor of Barcelona to talk to your particular mayor, or to have the mayor of San Francisco to go to your particular country and showcase what these cities are doing, I think that is the beginning, or that's building this grassroots network of innovators that we've talked about all morning, and actually taking it up a level and building the governance innovators or entrepreneurs and actually moving it forward. And I think that's what this series is all about. That's what our work in the ICT unit is about, and WBI is trying to figure out how we leverage all of this goodness that is happening in the world and make it specifically available to leaders around the world. It's a very imperfect process, and I would really hope and look for your input and how to help us do it better, because it's the only way we're going to get ourselves out of this mess that we're in, is to innovate ourselves out. And we don't have all the answers, but I think this seminar is intended to get this conversation going, which clearly it has, and help us solve this problem working together.
Thank you, Chris. In the interest of time, unfortunately, we'll have to wrap up, and we hope the questions here and discussion will carry on and will be further discussed in our subsequent webinars. Our next webinar will be on June 23rd. It's about improving city management through data and analytics, with speakers from Seoul, South Korea, and Mexico City. You can find more information from the E-Institute website. And please spend a few minutes to fill out the survey after the webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent participation, and we hope to see you next time.